When I watched those police officers tie my daughter Cordelia to that oak tree like some common criminal, I knew they had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. My name is Vivian Blackthorne, and I've been a military wife for 35 years. I've seen my husband Augustus deploy to 3 different wars, watched my daughter earn her stars through blood and sacrifice overseas, and I thought I'd witnessed every kind of courage there was. But nothing prepared me for what I was about to see that morning. Before we dive in, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? If you enjoy stories like this, make sure to hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow's episode is truly mind-blowing. Let's get started. Let me tell you about my daughter. General Cordelia Blackthorne stands 5'8" with steel gray eyes that have stared down enemy commanders from Afghanistan to Iraq. At 34, she's the youngest female general in the 47th Infantry Division, and she earned every single star on her collar through pure grit. When other kids were playing with dolls, Cordelia was field stripping rifles with her grandfather. When other teenagers were worried about prom dates, she was already accepted to West Point. This is a woman who once held a strategic position for 18 hours straight while under enemy fire, who has personally saved more American lives than most people will ever meet in their lifetime. But that morning, as I stood at my kitchen window with my coffee cup trembling in my hands, watching Sheriff Dalton Ridge's men force her arms behind that oak tree, she looked exactly like the little girl who used to climb that same tree to hide from thunderstorms. My heart was hammering against my ribs because I knew something those corrupt cops didn't know. Cordelia wasn't just some officer they could intimidate. She wasn't just my daughter they were messing with. She was a decorated general with an entire infantry division who would walk through hell for her. And they were about to find out exactly what that meant. You see, the Blackthorne family has served this country for 3 generations. My father-in-law fought in World War II. My husband Augustus commanded troops in Vietnam and Desert Storm, and now Cordelia was carrying on that legacy. We don't back down from fights, and we sure as hell don't abandon family. What those officers thought was going to be a simple intimidation tactic was about to turn into the biggest military response our small Virginia town had ever seen. Because when you tie up a general, you better make damn sure her army doesn't know where to find you. To understand what happened that morning, you need to know who Cordelia really is and why she came home. My daughter isn't just any general. She's the kind of leader who eats MREs with her troops instead of dining in the officer's mess, who knows every soldier's name in her command, and who has never asked anyone to do something she wouldn't do herself. 3 tours of duty, 2 Purple Hearts, and a Distinguished Service Cross. She could have been stationed anywhere in the world, commanding any unit she wanted. But she came home to rural Virginia because of her father. Augustus Blackthorne, my husband of 35 years, is a retired 4-star general who used to command respect from world leaders. He's the man who taught Cordelia everything she knows about strategy, honor, and never leaving a soldier behind. These days, he sometimes forgets my name. Alzheimer's is stealing him from us piece by piece, and watching this giant of a man disappear into confusion has been the hardest battle our family has ever fought. Cordelia requested extended assignment at Fort Harrison, just 20 miles from our family homestead, so she could help care for him. Every morning before dawn, she'd run the perimeter of our property, the same route she'd trained on as a kid. Then she'd sit with Augustus over coffee, going through old photo albums and war stories, hoping to spark some recognition in his eyes. On good days, he'd remember her rank and ask about her troops. On bad days, he'd look at her like she was a stranger wearing his daughter's face. Our house sits on 40 acres of Virginia countryside that's been in the Blackthorne family since 1952. It's where Augustus brought me as a newlywed, where Cordelia took her first steps, and where 3 generations of military heroes learned the meaning of service. The old oak tree where they would eventually tie Cordelia up was the same tree where Augustus used to push her on a rope swing, teaching her that courage meant holding on even when you were scared. For the past 6 months, things had been peaceful. Cordelia would spend her days managing her unit's training exercises and intelligence briefings, then come home to help me with Augustus. We'd established routines that kept him calm and comfortable. Dinner at 6 sharp, evening walks around the property, and bedtime stories from his old military memoirs. It was the kind of quiet life none of us had experienced since Cordelia was small. But I started noticing changes in her about a month ago. She'd get phone calls that made her jaw tighten, and she'd take them outside where Augustus and I couldn't hear. She began working later at the base, coming home with dark circles under her eyes and that 1,000-yard stare I recognized from Augustus's war days. When I asked her about it, she'd just say work was complicated and change the subject. Then came the surveillance. Black sedans with tinted windows driving slowly past our property line, clicking sounds on our landline that hadn't been there before. Augustus, despite his confusion, picked up on the tension. He'd stand at the window for hours, watching the road with the same alertness he'd shown during wartime. On his clearer days, he'd ask Cordelia direct questions. "They watching you, baby?" "Girl?" "Nothing I can't handle, Dad." That's not what I asked. She never gave him a straight answer, but I saw the worry in both their eyes. Military families develop instincts about danger, and every instinct I had was screaming that something was coming for us. The night before the arrest, Cordelia couldn't sleep. I found her at 3 in the morning, sitting on the porch in her PT clothes, staring at that oak tree. When I joined her with 2 cups of tea, she finally opened up just a little. "Mom, if something happens to me, you need to know that everything I've been doing has been to protect soldiers. American soldiers who deserve better than what they've been getting." "What kind of something?" "The kind where people with power try to silence people who ask inconvenient questions." I pressed her for details, but she just squeezed my hand and said she loved me. That's when I knew my daughter was in the middle of something bigger than family troubles or routine military politics. Cordelia had found something, or someone had found her. The next morning, when Sheriff Ridge's cars pulled into our driveway, with no sirens and no urgency, just the slow, deliberate pace of men who thought they held all the power, I realized our peaceful family life was about to end. But I also realized that whoever was behind this had made one critical error in judgment. They thought they were dealing with just one soldier. They had no idea they were about to face the entire Blackthorn legacy. The knock came at exactly 6 in the morning, sharp and authoritative. Not the polite rap of neighbors or the hurried tapping of delivery drivers, but the demanding sound of people who expected immediate compliance. Through our front window, I counted 4 patrol cars and 2 unmarked black sedans arranged in a semicircle around our driveway. 8 men in total, all armed, all wearing the kind of expressions that meant business. Sheriff Dalton Ridge stood at our front door like he owned the place. I'd known Dalton since he was a scrawny kid whose father ran the hardware store in town. Now he was 52, soft around the middle, with the kind of mustache men grow when they want to look more important than they are. He'd been sheriff for 12 years. And in all that time, the most serious crime he'd handled was probably cattle theft. But the man standing on my porch that morning wasn't the small-town sheriff I remembered. This version of Dalton Ridge had cold eyes and a badge that suddenly seemed to carry weight it had never carried before. "Mrs. Blackthorn, we need to speak with your daughter. She's not awake yet, Dalton." "What's this about?" "Official business. Wake her up." Cordelia appeared behind me before I could respond, already dressed in her Army PT uniform, like she'd been expecting this visit. Her hair was pulled back in a regulation bun, and she had that commanding presence that made even seasoned soldiers stand straighter. But I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her hands hung loose at her sides, ready for anything. "Sheriff Ridge, you're early for a social call." "This isn't social, General. We have a federal arrest warrant with your name on it." "On what charges?" Ridge pulled out a folded document that looked official enough, though something about his handling of it seemed rehearsed. "Misappropriation of military assets, conspiracy to obstruct federal investigations, and endangering national security." Cordelia's laugh was sharp and humorless. "That's interesting, considering I've never been under federal investigation. Mind if I see that warrant?" "You'll see it when you need to see it. Right now you need to come with us." I watched my daughter's face transform from mild annoyance to something much more dangerous. This was the expression that had earned her respect from hardened combat veterans. The look that said she'd faced down enemies who were a lot scarier than small-town sheriffs with big badges. "Sheriff, I'm a commissioned officer in the United States Army. If there are legitimate charges against me, The proper procedure is coordination with my commanding officer and military police. This circus you've brought to my family's home suggests someone didn't follow proper procedure. Ridge's jaw tightened, and I saw something flicker in his eyes that looked like fear. Your commanding officer already knows about this, General. Now stop wasting time and come with us. Then you won't mind if I make a phone call to verify that. Actually, I would mind, hands behind your back. That's when I knew this wasn't a legitimate arrest. Real federal agents would have brought military escorts. Real charges would have gone through proper military channels. This was something else entirely. Something that made my blood run cold. But Cordelia didn't resist when they cuffed her. She stood perfectly still, maintaining eye contact with Ridge the entire time, and I could see her mind working. She was analyzing, calculating, turning this situation into a tactical problem she could solve. You know, Sheriff, I've been investigating some interesting financial irregularities involving local defense contracts. Funny timing for these charges to appear. Ridge's face went red. Keep your mouth shut about things that don't concern you. Dead soldiers concern me. Defective equipment that kills American troops because some contractor wanted to maximize profit margins concerns me very much. Instead of putting her in a patrol car like any normal arrest, Ridge nodded to his men, and they started walking her toward our front yard. Toward the oak tree where she used to play as a child. Where are you taking her? I demanded, following them outside. Somewhere she can think about the consequences of sticking her nose where it doesn't belong. They forced Cordelia against the oak tree, wrapping rope around her waist and arms like she was some kind of dangerous animal. The symbolism wasn't lost on any of us. This wasn't about following legal procedures or serving justice. This was about humiliation, intimidation, and sending a message. But as I watched my daughter maintain her military bearing, even while being tied to a tree, I realized Ridge and whoever was behind him had made a fundamental miscalculation. They thought they could break her spirit by treating her like a criminal. They had no idea that every moment of this degrading display was being burned into the memory of a woman who had dedicated her life to protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. And they definitely had no idea that her army was about to find out what had happened to their general. As I watched those men secure the ropes around my daughter's arms, something inside me shifted from shock to fury to cold, calculated determination. They thought they were dealing with a helpless old woman and her tied-up daughter. They had no idea they were about to face 3 generations of military precision working in perfect coordination. Sheriff Ridge positioned his men around our property like they were planning to stay for a while. 2 officers took positions by their patrol cars, 2 more stationed themselves near the house, and Ridge himself settled into a lawn chair he'd dragged from our porch. The arrogance was breathtaking. He was treating our family home like his personal interrogation site, and my daughter like some kind of trophy he could display. You comfortable there, General? Ridge called out to Cordelia, who was maintaining perfect military posture despite being bound to the tree. We might be here for a few hours while we wait for some federal folks to come have a chat with you. That's when I knew this wasn't just about intimidation. They were buying time, waiting for someone, and that someone probably wasn't coming to, help Cordelia. I had to act fast, but I couldn't let them know what I was planning. I shuffled back toward the house, playing up the role of a confused elderly woman. I need to check on Augustus, I called over my shoulder. All this noise has him agitated. Ridge barely glanced at me. Stay inside, Mrs. Blackthorne. This doesn't concern you. If he only knew how wrong he was. Inside, I found Augustus standing at the living room window, his hands pressed against the glass, staring at Cordelia with an expression I hadn't seen in months. The confusion that usually clouded his eyes was gone, replaced by the sharp focus of the commanding general he used to be Vivian. His voice was clearer than it had been in weeks. They have our daughter. I know, Augustus. I know. This isn't right. This isn't how it's supposed to work. I took his hands in mine, feeling the strength that was still there despite everything the disease had taken from him. Augustus, I need you to remember something for me. Where did you keep your old military radio? The emergency one? His eyes sharpened even more, and for a moment I had my husband fully back. Basement, behind the furnace, in the green metal box. Emergency frequency Delta 7 for immediate tactical support. Who do I call? Captain Morrison. Thane Morrison. He's Cordelia's second in command. Tell him package compromised, wolves at the door. He'll understand. I kissed his forehead and headed for the basement, moving as quietly as I could. The old house creaked with every step, but Ridge's men were focused on their prisoner and their perimeter. They weren't watching for a 73-year-old woman sneaking through her own basement. The radio was exactly where Augustus said it would be, covered in dust but still functional. My hands shook as I turned it on, praying I remembered. The codes Augustus had taught me during our early marriage when he was training me for emergency situations. Back then, it had seemed like paranoid military thinking. Now, it was about to save our daughter's life. Delta 7 base, this is Homestead. Priority Alpha. Come in, Delta 7 base. Static crackled for what felt like hours but was probably only seconds. Then a voice I recognized from family dinners came through clear and strong. Homestead, this is Captain Morrison. Authenticate yourself. I took a deep breath. Package compromised. Wolves at the door. General Blackthorn is in immediate danger at Family Homestead. Hostile elements on scene. Copy, Homestead. Can you confirm General Blackthorn's status? Alive, restrained, approximately 8 hostiles on property. Local Sheriff's Department, but this isn't legitimate law enforcement. Repeat, this is not legitimate. There was a pause that made my heart stop. Then Morrison's voice came back with the kind of controlled intensity that meant serious military business. Understood, Homestead. Cavalry is coming. Stay inside and keep your head down. ETA 15 minutes. Captain Morrison. Yes, ma'am. Bring everything you've got. Already moving, ma'am. Tell the General that Charlie Company doesn't leave anyone behind. I turned off the radio and carefully made my way back upstairs, where Augustus was still standing at the window. When I reached him, he took my hand without looking away from Cordelia. Is help coming? Yes. Good. Because our daughter isn't just fighting for herself out there. She's fighting for every soldier who trusted her to keep them safe. Through the window, I could see Cordelia had started talking to Ridge again, her voice carrying across the yard with the kind of authority that made people listen whether they wanted to or not. She was buying time, keeping their attention focused on her instead of their surroundings. She had no idea help was coming, but she was doing exactly what a good general does. She was drawing fire to protect her family and giving her troops time to reach the battlefield. In 15 minutes, Sheriff Ridge was going to learn what happens when you threaten a Blackthorn. The rumbling started so quietly that Ridge's men didn't notice it at first. I felt it in my chest before I heard it, that deep vibration that every military wife recognizes. Heavy vehicles moving in formation, getting closer by the second. I glanced at Augustus, who had positioned himself at the window with the practiced eye of someone who had commanded similar operations decades ago. 6 Humvees, 2 troop transports, and what sounds like an armored personnel carrier. He whispered. To me, his military instincts cutting through the Alzheimer's like sunlight through fog. Cordelia's people don't mess around. Sheriff Ridge was still lounging in his stolen lawn chair, completely oblivious to what was bearing down on him. His men were scattered around the property in positions that might have worked for intimidating civilians, but would be absolutely useless against trained soldiers. They had no idea they were about to be outmaneuvered by some of the finest tactical minds in the military. The sound grew louder, and finally Ridge's head snapped up. His casual arrogance evaporated as the rumble became unmistakably mechanical, purposeful, and getting closer. One of his officers jogged over to him, pointing toward the tree line where dust clouds were rising above the road. Sheriff, we've got multiple vehicles approaching fast. Ridge stood up, his face going pale as the first Humvee crested the hill at the end of our driveway, then another, then another. Within 30 seconds, our quiet country property was surrounded by more military firepower than our county had probably seen since World War II. The vehicles formed a perfect tactical perimeter, blocking every escape route while maintaining clear lines of sight. Soldiers poured out in full combat gear, taking positions with the kind of precision that comes from years of training and absolute trust in their commanding officer. And there, in the center of it all, stood Captain Thane Morrison. I'd met Thane at several family gatherings over the years. He was 38, built like a linebacker, and had the kind of steady presence that made you understand why Cordelia had chosen him as her second-in-command. But the man stepping out of that lead Humvee wasn't the polite dinner guest I remembered. This was a combat veteran with 2 decades of experience, and he was absolutely furious. His voice boomed across our property with the kind of authority that made everyone freeze instantly. "Sheriff Ridge, this is Captain Morrison, United States Army. You are surrounded by elements of the 47th Infantry Division. Release General Blackthorne immediately and step away from her position." Ridge's mouth fell open like a fish gasping for air. His hand moved instinctively toward his weapon, but he stopped when he realized he was facing 43 armed soldiers who had trained for situations exactly like this. His officers looked around desperately, finally understanding they were completely outgunned and outmaneuvered. "This is a legitimate arrest," Ridge shouted back, his voice cracking with panic. "You have no authority here." Morrison walked forward slowly, his rifle held in a ready position but not directly threatening. Yet. "Sheriff, I'm going to explain something to you very carefully. General Blackthorne has been operating under direct orders from Army intelligence for the past 6 months. Every conversation you've had with her, every move you've made, has been recorded and documented as part of an ongoing federal investigation." The color drained completely from Ridge's face. I could see the exact moment he realized he'd been played. Cordelia spoke for the first time since the soldiers arrived, her voice carrying clearly across the yard with the kind of calm authority that made everyone listen. "Sheriff Ridge, did you really think the Army would send a general to investigate defense contractor fraud without proper backup and surveillance? Every meeting you had with Bronson Industries, every payment you received, every threat you made has been documented." "Captain Morrison," Cordelia continued, never taking her eyes off Ridge, "please inform Sheriff Ridge and his associates that they are under arrest for conspiracy, bribery, obstruction of justice, and violation of federal laws regarding military personnel." Morrison stepped forward with zip-tie restraints as his soldiers moved to surround Ridge's men. "Sheriff Dalton Ridge, you are under arrest by order of the United States Army Criminal Investigation Command. You have the right to remain silent. But the most powerful moment came when Morrison approached the oak tree to untie Cordelia. As soon as the ropes fell away, every single soldier on the property snapped to attention and rendered a perfect salute to their commanding officer. 43 men and women who had just executed a flawless tactical operation, showing their respect for a general who had been willing to endure humiliation to protect them and countless other soldiers. Cordelia returned their salute, then turned to look directly at Ridge as he was being loaded into the back of a military police vehicle. "Sheriff, the weapons shipment that was supposed to arrive next week, the one with the defective ammunition that would have killed American soldiers overseas, that shipment is never coming. Neither are the 15 others your friends had planned. Augustus." Appeared beside me on the porch, having made his way outside during the commotion. For one crystal-clear moment, he looked at his daughter standing proud and free surrounded by her troops, and rendered his own salute. "Mission accomplished, General." 2 hours after the last military vehicle pulled away from our property, taking Sheriff Ridge and his co-conspirators into federal custody, our house felt strangely quiet. The oak tree stood empty again, its bark scarred from the ropes, but still strong, still standing. Cordelia sat on the porch steps, having traded her torn PT uniform for jeans and one of Augustus's old army sweatshirts, looking more like the little girl who used to climb that tree than the decorated general who had just brought down a major defense contractor conspiracy. The scope of what she had uncovered was staggering. Operation Broken Arrow, as the investigation was formally called, had identified 17 different instances where Bronson Industries and their network of corrupt officials had supplied defective equipment to American troops overseas. Faulty ammunition that misfired in combat, body armor with substandard materials that couldn't stop the rounds they were rated for, communication equipment that failed during critical missions. The investigation estimated that their scheme had directly contributed to the deaths of 43 American soldiers and the wounding of over 200 more. Sheriff Ridge wasn't just some small-town corrupt cop taking bribes. He was a key facilitator in a network that stretched from local law enforcement all the way to Pentagon procurement offices. His job was to intimidate and silence anyone who got too close to the truth. Military investigators, government auditors, whistleblowing contractors. Ridge and his people had been systematically terrorizing them for years, but they made their biggest mistake when they targeted Cordelia. Captain Morrison returned that evening with updates and official paperwork. 17 arrests had been made across 4 states, including 2 Pentagon officials, 5 defense contractors, and multiple local law enforcement officers who had been providing security and intimidation services. The Justice Department was calling it one of the largest military procurement fraud cases in recent history. General, Morrison said as he handed Cordelia a thick folder of documents, "You should know that your work on this case is going to be studied at West Point. The way you maintained operational security while conducting a solo intelligence operation under hostile surveillance was textbook perfect." Cordelia smiled, but I could see the exhaustion in her eyes. 6 months of living a double life, knowing that discovery could mean death, had taken its toll. I had good teachers, Captain, and I had backup when it counted. About that, Morrison continued. Command wants to know if you're ready to return to active duty. There's talk of a promotion and a new assignment heading up the Army's Internal Investigations Division. I watched my daughter's face as she considered the offer. This was everything she had worked for. Recognition, advancement, the chance to make an even bigger difference. But then she looked through the window at Augustus, who was sitting in his favorite chair, having retreated back into the fog of his disease after his moment of clarity. Thank you, Captain, but I need to stay here for now. My father served this country for 35 years. The least I can do is serve him for whatever time we have left. Morrison nodded with the kind of understanding that comes from military families who know about sacrifice. Command figured you might say that. They're prepared to offer you a permanent assignment as Regional Intelligence Coordinator. You'd work from Fort Harrison, but have autonomy to investigate cases across the Southeast. It would keep you close to home. And my team? Your team goes where you go, General. Charlie Company isn't losing their commanding officer if they can help it. After Morrison left, the 3 of us sat on the porch as the sun began to set over the Virginia countryside. Augustus was having another clear evening, remembering stories from his own service days and asking Cordelia detailed questions about her investigation. These moments were precious because we never knew how many more we would have. You know what I learned today? I said as we watched fireflies begin to blink across our property. I learned that courage isn't just about facing down enemies on a battlefield. Sometimes it's about letting yourself be tied to a tree, trusting that the people who love you will come through when it matters most. Cordelia reached over and took my hand. I learned something too. I learned that 3 generations of Blackthorn military service created something stronger than just individual soldiers. We created a legacy of people who don't abandon each other, no matter what. Augustus looked up from his coffee cup, his eyes bright and focused. And I learned that raising a daughter to be stronger than her old man was the smartest thing I ever did. We decided to leave the small scars on the oak tree's bark, not as reminders of violation, but as proof that even when you're tied down, even when the odds seem impossible, the bonds of family and loyalty can set you free. That tree had seen 3 generations of Blackthorn children learn to climb, learn to fall, and learn to get back up. Now it would remind future generations that sometimes standing your ground means accepting help from the people who love you most. Because that's what real strength looks like. Not facing the world alone, but building something so solid that when one person falls, the whole structure doesn't collapse. It just gets stronger.